Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, here with my co-host Nick Olson. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. Vikings 7-1. Who'd have thought? Here we are after another. Somehow it was another photo finish.
Yeah.
One score game at the end, even though it probably shouldn't have been. But a win's a win. I'm happy. So I'll take these fraudulent wins as long as they keep racking up. So
yeah, I'll tell you what. There's two things I think about this. First, I think I was very wrong about how good some certain football teams would be this season, particularly in the NFC. Like, obviously, with the Rams, the Bucks, and the Packers kind of all falling flat on their face so far this season. We all probably got to watch that atrocious Bucks-Rams game because it was like the only game on in the afternoon slot after we had 8 games in the morning slot. It's just kind of ridiculous NFL scheduling there. But like the Vikings, what you can say about them is, yes, they are winning these close games. Yes, they're barely beating teams that aren't really all that good, right? All things considered, I think the Vikings should have been favored and should have won pretty much every single game they've won. You could argue about the Packers game, but with what we know about the Packers now, I think the Vikings are there's a pretty clearly a good explanation to why the Vikings won that football game so handily, right? So considering that, it's still impressive that the Vikings are 5-1 because even if they or 7-1, sorry, because even if they should have been favored in all 7 of those games, you know, in the NFL, that's still like a 60% chance to win a football game most of the time. So hitting those 60% chances every single time is just an impressive performance from the Vikings. Like you said, I think the underlying performance doesn't mean that this is, you know, the second best team in the NFL like the record might indicate, but I do think, you know, it's encouraging and it's great as a fan to see wins when your team's not necessarily performing up to that standard, and you think that they have the potential to perform better, right? Like, we've seen Kirk Cousins play a lot better and be a lot more efficient of a player than he has been so far this season, and I think that could help the Vikings improve moving on. The defense has looked a lot better in the past 2 games as well, but we'll dive into all of that and more starting right now, I guess. So why don't we start with that quarterback, Kirk Cousins, a lot more aggressive in today's game, or in Sunday's game, throwing the ball down the field. What did you see there, Nick?
yeah, I think aggressive is the right word to use. His average depth of target in this game was over 10 yards, 10.2 yards, which is not what we're used to seeing from Kirk Cousins, especially this year. He's had, I think, the 3rd lowest average depth of target. I think it was like 5.7 yards. So his average pass was only like 5 or 6 yards downfield. It was the 3rd lowest going into this game. Coming out of this game, it was one of the highest of anybody in this game, and that's notable, especially because the Commanders got so much pressure on Cousins. I mean, that entire front 4, even without Chase Young, is just so good. And Jonathan Allen, the Vikings had absolutely zero answer for him or for Darren Payne. So yeah, they got their lunch stolen from them. Cousins was under pressure on over 45% of his dropbacks. But still managed to push the ball down the field, still managed to push the ball into tight windows. I think that was kind of the story of the opening drive. You know, Vikings come out and they wind up in back-to-back 3rd and short situations, and they pass the ball. One of them, they hit Justin Jefferson, and he's kind of running a comeback route, and Benjamin St-Juste is kind of on top of the route, capping the route, but Jefferson's able to sort of work back the ball, and that it was well timed up, and St-Juste was kind of able to get in there, but, you know, Cousins was willing to take a chance and say, hey, I'm going to give my receiver a chance to catch this one, even though he's in tight coverage. And that's kind of what happened later in the game with the passing, the touchdown throw to Jefferson later on in that drive. You know, St-Juste was in a decent position to contest the throw, but Cousins just throws it up in the air, and Jefferson's able to high point and get his toes down. So a quarter of Cousins' throws in this game were to tight window throws. And I think kind of the story of the game is a lot of those tight window throws, a lot of those contested catches, Vikings weren't coming away with a lot in previous games. In this game, while there were still, I think, a lot of opportunities left on the field, there were drop passes, there were passes that, you know, there was one that Thielen made a diving, got one hand on. There was another one that Cousins underthrew it. It was a deep shot to Justin Jefferson, and ideally Cousins would not have underthrown it, so that Jefferson had to work his way back to the ball. But then it goes through Jefferson's hands too. So Nice. I like the aggression there from Cousins, but also it's too bad that Jefferson couldn't complete. He did a good job making up for it with a great job tracking the ball and boxing out, but wasn't able to actually catch the ball. Rare drop from Justin Jefferson in that situation. But even with those missed opportunities on the field, really encouraging to see Cousins pushing the ball down the field, throwing it into tight windows. I mentioned, he had the low depth of target, but Cousins was also one of the least aggressive quarterbacks throwing into tight windows, and I think he was like less than around 10% of his throws heading into the game on Sunday from Cousins were into tight windows with a defender within 1 yard at the catch point. In this game, it was 10 of his 40 throws, so 25%. That's a huge increase, more than twice as much as he had been doing. And I think that strategy generally paid off. I also think, aggression aside, I think this was just generally Cousins' best game he's played all year. I think it was in a separate tier. The pocket presence was phenomenal.
Yeah, the pocket movement was great.
Sidestepping, if an edge defender was crashing inside, he was sort of stepping to the side to buy himself additional pocket space. I was finding windows downfield. He was pushing the ball downfield. We'll talk into TJ Hockenson, but I think having Hockenson running those over routes, those basic routes, kind of over the middle of the field, really opens up, I think, the intermediate those intermediate windows. It reminded me actually a little bit, seeing Hockenson this offense, reminded me a little bit of those tight ends that Kirk Cousins had in Washington. Because when he had those great tight ends in Washington and Vernon Davis, and who else did he have there? Do you remember? It was like two tight ends, but they were both always.
Jordan Reed. It was Jordan Reed.
Jordan Reed, that's what I meant, not Vernon Davis.
Yeah.
But those guys really opened up that Washington offense, and I think Hockenson did a similar thing in this game too. So, really like seeing Cousins play. Really like seeing, even though I think especially when he's under that much pressure, we're kind of used to seeing Cousins kind of turtle up, and maybe he won't make a lot of mistakes under pressure, but he'll also sort of just throw it to the flat immediately, or that's where his hot reads will be. In this case, we saw him taking a lot of heavy hits, taking a lot of shots. I mean, he got taken out of the play because he got the wind knocked out of him on just a beautiful throw that he threw to Jefferson on kind of a go route, and what that was like kind of the play of the game from Cousins. But there were a lot of plays of the game from Cousins, but being able to be under that much pressure and still continue to push the ball down the field, that's not usually the kind of Kirk Cousins I'm used to seeing. So that's kind of the reason why, despite a box score that says like there was an interception, he didn't have a lot of yards per attempt, there wasn't a high completion percentage. I think all that you can account for that by Ezra Cleveland was getting absolutely demolished by Jonathan Allen and wasn't picking up stunts. And Ed Ingram and Garrett Bradbury weren't great either. So even with Cousins under pressure under almost half of his dropbacks, he was still pushing the ball down the field, testing tight windows, being aggressive, pushing the ball, and like playing the kind of quarterbacking that is winning quarterbacking, even if it doesn't necessarily stuff a stat sheet. So I thought all those things combined was just a very, very encouraging performance, particularly given the kind of criticisms that I've tended to have for Kirk Cousins in the past. So what do you think of
I agree. And I think overall, you just look at the flow of the game, right? And the Vikings ended up down 17-7. Kirk Cousins is able to lead a big drive back after they keep going 3 and out. They keep having failed drives where they failed like so many first downs in this football game, and they were constantly behind the chains because they couldn't get anything going up front. They couldn't run the ball. When they tried the short, quick game stuff, it wasn't working at all. And I think that's part of the reason Kirk ended up having such a high average depth of target, because the Commanders were playing very, very physical up front and very aggressive on that side. So when you're playing aggressive with the corners that they have, Benjamin St-Juste, I think, outplayed probably his status as a player against Justin Jefferson, but part of that was due to the physicality he was able to have up front. Now, that led to Justin Jefferson being able to separate late and make those contested catches, right? The touchdown, obviously a great contested catch, and on that first drive as well, and then you had that slot fade that was a 40-yard play, because you see physical play at the line of scrimmage. It's 3rd and 7, they're trying to take away short things, and Kirk is able to have the trust to go deep and make that throw. I think the addition of TJ Hockenson was a big boon here, because he hit TJ on multiple, deeper down the field throws, 10+ down the field, over the middle of the field, 10+ yards down the field, where Hockenson wins leverage against a player, right? So it's still a kind of a contested catch with a player on his back as he's making the catch, but he's able to win that leverage and use his big body, which is something I noticed quite a bit. And like you said, we'll get into TJ Hockenson later, but to win those plays, I think that was helpful. Adam Thielen on the couple big catches he had also gained separation, and even if it was a tight window throw, maybe he gained a little bit more separation than, to give Kirk an advantage of where to throw the football. So I think the receivers came into play there, and I do want to flip it over to the reason we kind of had to start chucking the ball down the field, because again, we were behind the chains, and the reason we were behind the chains is because the offensive line performed extremely poorly in this game. You kind of alluded to it there. Ezra Cleveland had an absolutely horrible time trying to pick up stunts, trying to go one-on-one against Jonathan Allen. He lost a ton of reps against Jonathan Allen one-on-one. It was kind of disappointing to see, because Cleveland had built up a really nice resume so far this year. In fact, we were talking just last week when we gushed about Christian Darrisaw, how good both Darrisaw and Cleveland were communicating on stunts and picking up stunts, and they really just didn't do a good job in this football game of doing that. I think part of it was quickness on the defensive line part. Like, the Commanders players were getting across Cleveland's face quickly, and there were times where he knew what he had to do, he just physically wasn't able to get there. Which, is sometimes, the other guys get paid too, right? And sometimes you're going to get beat, but the consistency with which our interior offensive linemen were getting beat in this game is just not tenable over the course of a game or over the course of a season, right? If we have to play a quality starting defensive line, I think this is going to be a concern moving forward from the Ezra Cleveland side. Obviously, we've already been concerned about the performance of Ed Ingram, and that wasn't any better today, and I don't think we could have expected it to be any better, given the fact that, this is probably one of the most difficult lines we've faced so far, if not the most difficult defensive line that we've faced so far. I honestly can't think of one that comes particularly close, at least in recent weeks. So, at the end of the day, the offensive line needs to perform better if this team is going to be not just competitive and beating the Washington Commanders by 3 points, but competitive against playoff caliber teams.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make, because I feel like this is kind of the script of games that we'd see that the Vikings, the kind of playoff caliber defensive lines that we'd see in the past, it would be kind of the Vikings' kryptonite. I think back to that 49ers game when the Vikings offense just got completely shut down in 2019, or the NFC Championship game against the Eagles in 2017, or any sort of these like playoff games when the Vikings, a perennially underperforming offensive line matched up against the playoff caliber defensive lines. Cousins would be under constant pressure, and the running game could never get going because they were just so outmatched in the trenches. And that was kind of what happened in this game, and that's kind of what makes it particularly encouraging of how Cousins was able to respond to all that pressure and push the ball down the field. And still, while the offense stalled out because there were a lot of screens that couldn't get going. 2 of them were to TJ Hockenson, who I think the chemistry just isn't there yet. And there were a couple ones that the Washington Commanders just kind of keyed in on very quickly and shut them down, wide receiver screens, running back screens as well. So they tried to get a few things going, but they often couldn't. And so that led to the Vikings being behind the chains. And then the run game, and we haven't really talked about the run game much, but Madison and Cook combined for 2.5 yards per carry. I mean, Washington was just doing a very, very nice job fitting the run, giving basically nowhere for Cook or Madison to go with the ball. So a lot was put on Cousins to kind of respond, and he was under a lot of pressure. The tackles played well. As much as we're talking about the offensive line struggling, Darrisaw had another one of his signature dominant games where he looked like a man among boys against guys out there. And O'Neal played well too, but it was really the interior offensive line, particularly Cleveland. But Ingram had some really rough moments too as well in pass protection. So the fact that offensive line couldn't do any better than stalemate at best in the run game, leading to being behind the chains basically every time they decided to run the ball, and the fact that when they wanted to pass the ball, Jonathan Allen was in Kirk Cousins' face within 3 seconds, almost every single snap. That's kind of what made it really encouraging, because I think a lot of fans right now are saying, okay, this team is good, but we know that the offensive line isn't good enough to hang with the playoff caliber defensive lines in the playoffs. We've seen this script before. Well, this kind of game was kind of what this is this is one of the best defensive lines, I think, in the NFL. Certainly will be with Chase Young back. There are a couple other ones. We'll probably see the Jets and the Giants up at next on the schedule. I think they also have very good defensive lines, especially the interior defensive lines like the Commanders. But I think seeing Cousins being able to respond the way he did makes me feel a little bit more encouraged about, okay, maybe even if this isn't, a great offensive line, I still think with the weapons and with the way Kirk Cousins, if he can keep playing like this, that's a winning recipe, especially if maybe we switch it over to the defensive side of the ball, because the defense was another big reason that the Vikings were able to stay in this game, because they were very dominant as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And why don't we flip it over right to the defensive side of the ball? We'll get to TJ Hockenson a little bit later. We had another note that the run game couldn't get going. I think that was primarily due to the offensive line. You know, it's not like Dalvin Cook has lost his step or anything. We've talked about the struggles the offensive line had against this defensive line. So I think that pretty much covers what happened in the run game. Like, I don't think there's anything unique there. But if we flip it over to the defensive side of the ball, I think they are the primary reason the Vikings were able to win this game, right? Obviously, the Washington offense is not all that great, but the Vikings were playing down on defense on either side of the ball, really, for the first time this season with Dalvin Tomlinson out. I think James Lynch filled in admirably in that position. We were generally able to contain their run game, but where we really dominated was in the passing game. If you watch Taylor Heinicke, most snaps of Taylor Heinicke kind of look like backyard football. In this game, I think almost every snap of Taylor Heinicke looked like backyard football because he was constantly under pressure and constantly trying to make things happen. And we got a number of sacks based off of that, right? Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter combined for 16 pressures. Taylor Heinicke, we talked about how much Kirk Cousins was under pressure. Taylor Heinicke was under pressure even more on 48% of his dropbacks. So it was both sides of the ball. The defensive line kind of dominated on the day, and the Vikings were able to turn that into an interception. What should have been an interception on a different play that we'll get to a little bit later, but and just generally shutting down the Washington passing offense for most of the day. You want to add some more on the defensive line there, Nick?
Yeah, Zadarius Smith continues to look like one of the best defensive players in football. I think he's kind of a dark horse defensive player of the year. I mean, right now, he's played one less game than a lot of these other players at the top of the sack leaders and stuff. He's only played 8 games, but he leads the NFL in pressures with 45, and he's tied for second in the NFL in sacks with 8.5. Didn't even get a sack this game, but he managed to pull away and be the number one guy on pressures, and he's doing it dominantly. Whether he can line up against pretty much any offensive lineman and win. He had some really impressive wins going up against right tackles, winning purely with power. He can also win to the outside, but he's most deadly rushing, spinning from the inside down. You saw that a lot this game. You saw him loop over a center and just sort of like dust him completely. When he wins very emphatically. And it's really impressive the way he's able to sort of he clearly doesn't like rush with a predetermined plan. He clearly like rushes and is able to just sort of respond to what the offensive lineman is doing. And if they shoot their hands early, he'll swipe them down and sort of do an arm over, and boom, he's immediately in the quarterback's lap. If they're delayed, he'll sort of just bull rush them. He has a way to basically beat everybody, and he's so good at timing the snap that makes him especially effective in that sort of spinner role. He'll kind of roam around and then eventually at the snap, like come down at full speed against an interior offensive lineman one-on-one who usually doesn't have the bulk to withstand going up against somebody with as much power as Zadarius Smith has in his hands. So really impressive game from him. Arguably an even more impressive game, though, from Danielle Hunter, who did come away, even if Zadarius Smith had 9 pressures to Hunter's 7, Hunter did come away with 2 sacks in this game. And I think both of them were very high quality. I think This was a game, we kind of said this was coming. The sack regression was coming. Hunter was playing extremely well. Eventually, he was going to get his day with the sacks, and this day was it. He got 1 sack, really strong early on with kind of his weird it was like a feint inside and then do like work outside and sort of rip underneath and through and get to the quarterback. But basically, as soon as Heinicke hit the top of his drop, Hunter was there to meet him at the top of his drop and sack him. Same thing later on in the game, except he did his weird little I don't have words for all the moves that Hunter does, but it's like he'll like rip, but he'll also yank like your outside hand or whatever down and use that to sort of get around you and win to the outside. It's like a wrestling move almost, like an arm pull. And so he did that to get to the quarterback too as well. He also had some other really impressive moves. He had a spin move. He was generating very consistent pressure. Often, despite being chipped by a tight end or being met by a running back as well, who was sort of in the protection as well. So those 2 guys were very impressive. I thought Wanham continues to have some really impressive rushes as well. It missed Dalvin Tomlinson in this game, I think, especially in the run game. But just talking about the front guys up front, those edge rushers are going to continue to put this team in positions to win. special teams kind of let this team down, I think, a little bit in this game. At least there were a lot of times, there's a big return they allowed right before that crazy 49-yard touchdown to Curtis Samuel. So the defense, I think, was put in a lot of tough positions with the offense kind of sputtering in the middle of the game, going 3 and out or maybe a 6 and out a couple times. And being given like tough field positions, but the fact that they were able to get pressure on Heineke so often, and a lot of times quick pressure, not just like junk pressures, but like quick pressures. With a quarterback like Heineke, sometimes it'll be junk pressures, but with this one, it was just pure dominance, I think, all game long. That really helps the team. It helps them win. It was a big reason. I mean, coverage on the back end. We'll talk about the coverage on the back end as well, because I thought they also played well. But I mean, together they held Heineke to 4.1 net yards per attempt, so including the yards lost with the sacks. It was 4.1 yards per attempt. If you take out the Curtis Samuel touchdown, which I would, because I think the Vikings did everything right there, it drops down to 2.5 net yards per attempt. So that's like, as bad as the Vikings were on the ground, the Commanders' passing game was as bad as that. So like that's about as dominant a performance as you'll see from pass coverage and pass rush combined. So even the fact that it was Taylor Heineke, backup quarterback, I mean, the Commanders have some really, we talked about how good their weapons are. Terry McLaurin had a pretty quiet game. So I think all that combined, it was just a very impressive performance. Probably shouldn't have been as close as it is. And now maybe, do you want to talk, Matt, about what happened on that 49-yarder to Curtis Samuel?
Oh my goodness. I mean, so I think there are a couple ref moments in this game where you really question what was going on, but obviously that's the first one. And ultimately, the ref should not have done what he did on the play. I think this is not, there's no crazy conspiracy that the NFL wants to make the Washington team look good because they're trying to sell the team or anything like that. It's just the ref is a human, and he made a mistake on the play by literally running directly into Cam Bynum, who was preparing to intercept the pass. Taylor Heineke makes a really poor decision, throws into literally triple coverage, and both Harrison Smith and Patrick Peterson see that Cam Bynum is going to intercept the pass, so they don't go up for the pass. Cam Bynum gets run into. Curtis Samuel is able to go up, make the catch, roll into the end zone, get a 49-yard touchdown. Like, it's kind of crazy. There was another play, actually, the other Washington touchdown was after a third down sack by Zadarius Smith that got wiped off the board because he did get a face mask. Like, he barely clipped Taylor Heineke's face mask.
It was extremely tic-tac.
It's an extremely tic-tac call. It's
technically correct.
It's a technically correct call. It's frustrating because it's technically correct, but it was really tic-tac. And then on the subsequent drive, the Washington has a play that's called. That's a flag is thrown for a face mask on Justin Jefferson, and this ended up not mattering because we got that 46-yard bomb or whatever it was to Justin Jefferson the play later. But it should have been a horse collar. Based on my understanding of the rules, he had Justin Jefferson's nameplate. He tackled him forward, but Patrick Peterson got called for literally that same thing last week against Arizona, where he tackled Eno Benjamin forward. So I'm pretty confident that that's a horse collar tackle, and that should have been a 15-yard penalty. So that combination of ref plays that affected the Vikings back to back was pretty frustrating to see in this game. But overall, I mean, it's not like the officiating's been killing the Vikings all season, so it's great to see them kind of overcome that bad luck in officiating, right? It's not some sort of bias against the Vikings, it's just bad luck ultimately. Like, the refs are human and they make errors.
Yeah, totally. And you could also add on top, I think there were a number of offensive pass interference calls that the Vikings should have gotten that they didn't, and defensive pass interference calls, particularly St. Juste against Justin Jefferson. But also against, Thielen, because he's been getting mugged all year, and at this point I've just gotten used to it. But St. Juste was playing very aggressively with Jefferson. And on that 49-yarder to Curtis Samuel, it's just so funny. They were running like it was kind of a Yankee concept where Samuel was running a skinny post over the top, and they had the slot receiver to the other side running that crosser, so that's kind of the Yankee concept. But the Vikings were matching it with their half quarter play, and it was the quarter side to Curtis Samuel's side, and because the weak side quarters coverage and the weak side safety, in this instance Harrison Smith, is kind of like free to kind of like be the wild card on the play. He just kind of carries it. So they basically wind up with like bracket coverage.
Yep.
And Heineke throws it anyway, even though it's covered by them. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't even see Cam Bynum on the other side. And Cam Bynum, he's on the half side, and instead of covering the dig underneath, he kind of like he follows the quarterback's eyes and goes with Curtis Samuel. And it's just so funny that like Heineke's like, screw it, I'm throwing it anyway. I'm pretty sure he doesn't see this Cam Bynum, and so he just chucks it up there. And it should have been the world's easiest interception ever, and Cam Bynum should have had like a 40-yard interception return. Instead, it turns into a 49-yard touchdown on 2nd and long. So, wild swing of play to not even count all the other ref play. But these are the sorts of things that makes it funny. Like when I hear like, oh, the Vikings, like they keep winning these fraudulent 1-score wins. Like, well, yeah, I guess, but some of them are 8 points, and some of them clearly should not have been 1-score games. Or some of them, like there was a missed extra point, or there were 2 missed 50-yard field goals. So I feel pretty confident in saying the Vikings are good, even if not to go on too much of a digression, but even the fact that like, oh, 1-score wins aren't predictive year to year or year, but like, yeah, that's true. But also like DVOA isn't predictive. Like the past 9 weeks of DVOA is not predictive of the future 7 weeks. It's like the R squared of like your win total before and your win total after is like 0.15. It's like that does not, that explains very, very little. It's mostly noise. The things that we know about, the things that are stable are things like passing grade, wide receiver grade, how good the EPA per play on offense, things that maybe not EPA per play on offense, but like the passing grade, the offensive grade, the basically how good are the players on your team. That's kind of predictive. And right now, the Vikings, okay, I said I wanted to get into a digression. I really am, but so I'll wrap this up.
That's okay. That's okay.
The highest graded team in football. I mean, this team's playing really well. The tackles are playing well. The wide receivers are really good. Kirk Cousins, I think, is playing well, especially after this week. They've got Pro Bowlers all over the offense. The defense is starting to click. The front four, especially Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith, they're playing kind of up to what we would have hoped. They're looking like one of the best pass rushing teams in the NFL. And the coverage is kind of things are coming together. Akayleb Evans looked really strong this game. Patrick Peterson having a resurgence. The safeties are getting a lot of interceptions. They're generating turnovers. Kendricks is still having high-level plays. I thought this was Jordan Hicks' best game. So I really think, say what you will about all the 1-score games and, oh, the Vikings team isn't very good and, oh, they played a lot of backup quarterbacks. Yeah, maybe, but also they're playing really well. So I have a lot more confidence in saying Christian Darrisaw is going to continue to play well. Justin Jefferson is going to continue to play well. Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter are going to continue to generate pressure than I do in saying like, oh, well, looking at the history of 1-score games, I think the Vikings are going to regress in terms of their ones. I find just look at watching the players, I feel like this is a good football team. So rant over. But I just wanted to get that in there while we were on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to pull out a couple things just from what we've talked about on the defense. First of all, shout out to Danielle Hunter. Obviously, 2 incredible sacks in this game. We've been talking about it all along here, but it's not that Danielle Hunter has been playing poorly. It's that Danielle Hunter's production has not matched his level of play so far. And we're hopefully going to start to see his level of production match how he has been playing. And, Washington leaving him one-on-one against that right tackle was a very big mistake, and they made it a couple times, and he really punished him for it. So that was impressive. And like you said, and I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, the Vikings have been the better team against every opponent they've beaten so far this season. Like, they've been the better football team in all of those games, and they've ended up winning all of those games. Now, the better football team doesn't always win every single game, right? It's not an expectation that the Vikings, it shouldn't be an expectation that the Vikings are just going to walk in and win all of the games that they should be favored in for the rest of the season, but it's really nice to see them do that without everything clicking 100% of the time all the time, right? There are still large stretches, like in this game, where the offense consistently goes 3 and out, and they're not moving the ball down the field on a consistent basis, like some of the best teams in the NFL do, like some of the best offenses in the NFL do. So, and we know they have the potential to do more, right? They have the potential to have that consistency. We've seen that consistency with basically the same offensive personnel in the past, right? And it hasn't necessarily been every single game, but we've seen them put games together where they are absolutely dominant on offense. I think we can do that moving forward, and we might see a couple games here moving on where we finally get to reach that level of consistency, and that's when we can see what this Vikings team can really be in the future down the road into the playoffs, right? If they're able to put everything together, they might have the opportunity to go on a run in the playoffs, which I think is more than I would have predicted prior to the season. So it's really nice to see there. So why don't we flip it over into Tape Talk now? There are two Vikings who got significant snaps on the Vikings for the first time. One is a new player, one's a rookie, and we're really excited to talk about both of them. So we're going to kick it off, starting with TJ Hockenson. I got a chance to watch all of TJ Hockenson's snaps just earlier today, actually, and I really wanted to put the focus on him because he's new to the team. And I think the first thing that jumps off is we weren't afraid to use him in any alignment, right? We were willing to ask him to do every single thing you ask a tight end to do. It wasn't a limited TJ Hockenson package, because he's new to the team and he doesn't understand the playbook. Now, he credited, who I believe is on our practice squad, David Blau, former Lions quarterback, as kind of acting like a translator for him, helping him understand the offense and kind of translate what they did at the Lions to what they're doing now. So, credit to that. But it's also a credit to TJ Hockenson for learning and having the dedication to learn what the offense was asking him to do. Now, there were a couple snaps where I think he did the wrong thing. He didn't pick up a corner blitz that led to Kirk getting sacked, or maybe he got out of that sack, but it led to a sack. There was one play on a play action Kirk rollout where he and Johnny Munt were in the same area. I'm going to assume that TJ Hockenson's at fault on that play, right? So it's clear that he still is getting up to speed, but I think what we saw is really a dynamism from the tight end position that we haven't really seen in a very long time. Maybe early Kyle Rudolph kind of offered that kind of dynamic, but even late career Kyle Rudolph was more of a contested catch player. TJ Hockenson is able to win dig routes across the middle of the field. He's able to win or force potential penalties on defensive backs. On that one KJ Osborne over the middle, Kirk did a really nice job stepping up, but TJ Hockenson's running an out route, and he really should have gotten a holding call. Like the defensive back held him, and he still won the route. Another underrated aspect of TJ Hockenson, or something that really jumped out to me when I was watching the film, is his actual just physical height. Because there's a couple plays where Kirk's throwing over the middle and TJ has to elevate, and he's catching the ball at chest level, jumping up in the air. That's something that would be at face level for Irv Smith, who's really not that tall. And I think that makes a difference because we had kind of talked about this in the preseason. The Vikings, prior to having TJ Hockenson, didn't have a player on their roster who was 6'6" or whatever TJ is, right? They didn't have a player with that height on their roster, and I think that can benefit us down the line in the red zone too. But just overall for TJ, I think you see that he's a dynamic athlete at the tight end position, right? He has the level of athleticism we expected from Irv Smith in just a bigger package, and I think that's really impressive. Obviously, that's part of the reason why he was, the number 8 overall pick or whatever, but the Vikings are being able to add this to this offense, which is already a pretty good offensive roster with a cast of weapons, are just really good. Another thing I wanted to call out is I thought he was pretty good as a blocker in this game. There were a couple losses, but there were a number of times where he gained the advantage and gave the running back a hole in the run game. And on that one Adam Thielen catch, there was one long Adam Thielen catch. We asked him to be one-on-one against Montez Sweat, and he ended up losing the rep eventually, but he strained just enough to enable Kirk to get that ball off. And that's one-on-one for a tight end against one of the most athletic players in the league in Montez Sweat, like one of the most powerful, dominant, athletic freak defensive lineman in the NFL. So I was just really impressed overall with TJ Hockenson's game, from run blocking to pass catching. And even, he caught every single one of his targets, and even the failed plays were literally just designed screens that didn't go well. There's nothing TJ Hockenson necessarily could have done better on those plays. I think it's just, it needs to be blocked up better. Like, I don't think he even did a bad job of feigning his block. It's just other defensive linemen were coming off of their blockers and going to the screen rather than chasing after the quarterback. So I mean, A+ for TJ Hockenson in his first game for me, especially considering the circumstances of, he's been with the team less than a week.
Yeah, I mean, he played 60 of 66 snaps. So clearly, that's with a guy who was just swimming in the playbook for two
Yep.
days, and they still managed to get him out there on almost 100% of the snaps, maybe missed 6 of them. So he's clearly going to be, a figure piece of this offense going forward. And I think you couldn't have asked for a more encouraging debut performance, especially considering he was traded midweek, came into the offense. The problems that I saw were all mental things that I think will be ironed out simply by continuing to learn the playbook and getting the chemistry, like the missed pass block on that nickel blitz. There were a couple run blocks where he climbed to the second level defender where I think he should have swung out a little bit to catch the edge defender or something. So there were a couple mistakes I think in run blocking as well, but those are the sorts of things that I think can be ironed out. And I also saw I thought his run blocking looked very impressive, and well, I mean, I don't want to oversell it, but it looked fine. It looked good. This was something I've been harping on a little bit. Hockenson has an extreme split in his blocking grades per Pro Football Focus, where on man blocking run concepts, like duo or power or trap and basically anything where he's forced to drive block. He's graded out as one of the worst run blocking tight ends in football, pretty much each of the last 4 years. He's never graded, I think he had 1 year on a limited snap count where he graded fine, but he's put up some very, very poor run blocking numbers on those man concepts, on those power those man blocking concepts. But when it came to zone, he's posted an above average run blocking grade on every single zone, every single year on zone concepts. So mid zone, wide zone, outside zone, and all the variations off of it, pin pulls, sweeps, and all those things. So, and I think you saw that in this game. He had one particularly impressive rep on, I think it was a mid zone strong, and it was him and Christian Darrisaw, and they combo blocked an edge defender, and Hockenson was able to climb, help Hockenson get leverage and then seal off the edge defender, and then climb to the second level defender and seal off that guy and carry him and continue. And that's not easy to do. It takes coordination, it takes balance, it takes good grip strength, it takes a lot of good things. And I feel like you saw being able to see those highlight level blocks was encouraging. And I think the mistakes he made in blocking are correctable and are understandable given that he is very new to this offense. But that's kind of burying the lead a little bit, because this guy caught 9 catches in his debut game. 7 of those catches were for 75 yards. 5 of those were for first downs. And I think a lot of our what we were so excited about Hockenson last week kind of came fully to fruition in this game. The ability to be 6'6" tight end with also so much wiggle. I mean, he separated on one of those there was like a shake route at the top of his route on one of those basics over the middle where he shook a cornerback out of his shoes. I mean, this is a tight end who's 250 pounds or something, shaking a cornerback out of his shoes. So really impressive stuff. You saw all that athleticism, but you saw that it's not just testing numbers. It's functional. He's like a very good route runner too, and to have that element added to our offense is just really excited. So I think it's only going to continue to get better, which is saying something, because he had one heck. I don't think the Vikings win this game if the Vikings didn't trade for Hockenson at the deadline. So about as encouraging a performance from Hockenson in his debut as you could have asked for.
Yeah, he's a very lanky player, but he's also an extremely fluid player. Like, he looks lanky, and then he moves extremely fluidly, and that's really exciting to see from somebody of that size. And it was a fantastic debut. So somebody else who did not quite get his debut, but saw his first significant playing time on defense was Akayleb Evans. And yes, that is Akayleb Evans playing it over Andrew Booth, who is healthy. Nick and I obviously have both talked about how much we like Andrew Booth, but Akayleb Evans won the job over him, or won the backup job over him in camp. The coaches saw his performance and thought it was better. And I think based on his performance in this game, I can't be too mad about that. Cameron Dantzler had an ankle injury. Akayleb Evans kind of had to come in and replace it. And in the run game, in the short tackling game, Akayleb Evans played exactly like Cameron Dantzler has been playing. He was fantastic, making a couple tackles for loss, and a couple great tackles. He obviously also had that huge 4th down play, and we believe didn't allow any catches, unless you count like a short screen where he got a tackle for loss. So that's a negative play that he's creating there. So I just read off the stats. Nick, do you want to get into the tape and tell us a bit about his play?
Yeah, I think the tape is even more exciting than the stat line because I mean the aggression in the run game was really awesome because a lot of times you don't see cornerbacks who are willing to get into the run. I mean it was kind of just he was joining a dog pile, but there was a run where a running back I was trying to like bounce it to the outside and then bounced it inside the tackle, and I think some cornerbacks probably would have just been honestly Patrick Peterson at this point probably would have been like I don't need to like risk my body. Akayleb Evans charges downhill full speed and lowers his shoulder into the back to say like I'm not letting you get that extra half yard of yards after contact. So that was one. There was another. There were two times a running back bounced it to the outside. On one was inside zone, and one I think was duo that the running back just kind of improvised and bounced it outside. And in both instances, Akayleb Evans was one-on-one with a running back trying to win the edge against a cornerback. And anytime you see that, a running back running to the field and it's just one-on-one versus a cornerback with a lot less poundage on him, that's advantage running back. And both times Akayleb Evans just like dragged him, wrapped him down, got him around the ankles, got him around the knees, and sort of wrapped up. Really impressive tackles both times. So that I think was really encouraging that you have the physicality of this cornerback to play in the run game. But you pay these cornerbacks to be able to cover, and cover he did. I mean, on that fourth down, it was funny. We had a lot of fourth down shenanigans on this game on both sides because of the Washington's biggest play of the game, other than that 49-yarder to Curtis Samuel, was a 3rd-and-1 jet sweep. The Vikings also got a big chunk play on a 3rd-and-1 jet sweep as well. On this one, they made it seem it was like 4th and inches or 3rd and inches, and they made it seem like it was going to be on a run. So they kind of didn't have any safety help. But Akayleb Evans ran with this guy, and it was just kind of a crosser going across the field. But the wide receiver established leverage, but Evans was with him step for step. And when I saw it live, I was like, I think Akayleb Evans did a great job, just like sort of disrupting the wide receivers, like elbows pulling it in so he wasn't able to get his hands on the ball. But then when I watched the all-22 and saw the end zone tape, he punched the ball out. So he got his hands fully through the ball, punched it out, flies off. So just a really nice punch, really nice job reading that play. Really nice job. I mean, that's tough, especially as a cornerback, because you have a run responsibility too when you're trying to shut down the run as well. So to be able to do that, but also run step for step with a fast wide receiver across the field and punch the ball out, force the turnover on downs, that's really impressive. But that wasn't his only good play in coverage. I mean, like we said, he didn't allow any other catches in coverage. His coverage was good. He looked very fluid. I mean, he was. You see the same traits on film. Like he's got the speed to carry guys downfield. He's got fluid enough hips to sort of flip his hips, go downfield. There was a really impressive rep he had where a guy was running a comeback and he timed it very well so that Evans was just starting to open up his hips to carry him downfield. That's when the wide receiver hit the brakes, but Evans was able to sort of mirror the entire route and hit the brakes simultaneously and shut off the route. And it wasn't targeted that play, but those are the sorts of things you want to see on the all-22. There was maybe the one play that he kind of got a little confused or didn't see things downfield was that weird little flea flicker, but it ended up being okay because Heineke overthrew it, and I'm not going to hold that against Akayleb Evans for basically a trick play. It's like whatever, trick plays are not going to be predictive of future performance. The other one that I'll say is there was a 3rd down where Washington likes to run a lot of mesh concepts on 3rd down. And, I've been harping, I think, on the Vikings, especially after the Eagles game and especially after the Lions game, about how they're not communicating well. They're not passing off these routes. They're giving up easy completions on mesh. And on this one, Jordan Hicks, Akayleb Evans, and Eric Kendricks kind of pass off all the mesh, the crossing routes right away. And Evans is basically able to intercept the route and basically deny any passing window there. So the fact that this was a backup coming in, but is still able to just sort of be completely in sync, complete chemistry with everybody, be able to pass off routes seamlessly, really encouraging stuff. Makes me feel, if you had told me that Dancer would be out in the game, we were going into Buffalo against Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, all those guys, and possibly Josh Allen, I would have been pretty terrified. But the way Akayleb Evans played, and granted it was only 2.5 quarters, but the way he played, the way he looked on tape, really encouraging stuff, especially from a guy who's just a rookie. So I thought that was all really encouraging stuff to see, both the traits, the run defense, the pass breakups, but also the mental stuff, the communications, the chemistry. It was all really encouraging stuff.
Yeah, that mental stuff and the technique stuff is what you had questions about him for, because he had all of the physical traits, right? He's like 6'2", he has that catch-up speed, and like you mentioned, I believe that 4th and 1 was against Terry McLaurin where he got that knockout. Terry McLaurin ran like a 4.31 at the combine, though Washington wants a one-on-one matchup with their best receiver who's really fast running across the field against Akayleb Evans. That's the matchup that they want on that play, and he was able to shut it down. So that's really, really fantastic to see just from the young rookie. It's great. And this is a 4th-round pick that we got a starting caliber NFL game out of, basically. So I think it's been a win so far, and hopefully if he gets more playing time, if Cam Dantzler can't go, he's able to continue to progress. So why don't we flip it over and talk about the Bills game, right? Preview the Bills. Obviously, the big headliner heading into this game is Josh Allen has apparently a UCL injury, which is an elbow ligament. It's the ulnar collateral ligament, is my understanding. So it affects his throwing motion. There's not real clear information into how serious the injury is. We're recording this on Wednesday. He did not participate in practice today. So obviously it's going to affect him heading up to the game. But we don't know at this point whether it's he can't really throw a football and therefore he's not going to play and we're going to see Case Keenum, or if it's it's pain for him, but he can still throw the football on a pretty normal basis, and he just kind of has to work through it. Or, maybe it's a short thing that you can just rest for a few days and it gets a little bit better. On the flip side, the Vikings also have probably their most significant injury report of the season. Adam Thielen was limited. He's been limited for a variety of reasons for a while. Obviously, Dalvin Tomlinson, who missed the last game, was a DNP as well today. Cameron Dantzler, who we mentioned, was a DNP. And a surprise to me on the injury report was Garrett Bradbury was also DNP on the injury report. So we have 4 starters on the injury report. 3 of those are do not participate. It may affect us going forward. Obviously, we haven't had any offensive line issues. It's been the same starting 5 probably. They've played every single snap together. I don't know. Maybe somebody's gone out for a short injury here or there. But the starting 5 has played every single snap. If Garrett Bradbury can't go or something, or that injury affects him, that's a big question mark for me against the Bills as well. But I've gone through the injury report. Anything that concerns you on the Viking side, and then why don't you give us a little bit about Josh Allen?
Yeah, so the Sharps clearly are thinking that Josh Allen won't play because the line currently, the line opened at like Buffalo -10 or something. So, but the game's in Buffalo, so you give them 3 points there. And the Vikings may be 7-1, but Buffalo is, the current betting favorite for the Super Bowl. Just a very stacked roster, top to bottom, defense, offense. So, I'm not going to be too offended if people think the Bills are a touchdown favorite on a neutral field against the Vikings. But that's shifted all the way down to only -3.5, basically a coin flip on an even field against Buffalo. So the downgrade from Josh Allen to Case Keenum, as it seems like betting market seems to think it'll be, that is quite a downgrade because Josh Allen is just, a build-in-a-lab quarterback. Very, very smart. I think it's underrated how good he is pre-snap and figuring things out there. But obviously also, like 99 throw power, 99 athleticism, 99, like size, speed, build, everything you want in a quarterback there. Good enough to design your QB run game out of as well. We've seen him hurdle Anthony Barr. He's still that same quarterback who can, you can run QB power with him out of empty. So you can do a lot of fun things with him, but also he's got a howitzer. There is, especially against a team that likes to play so much zone coverage, you got to be careful with that because the passing windows against Taylor Heineke are going to look a little different going up against Josh Allen's bazooka. So very talented quarterback. He's also gotten a lot more accurate. That used to be the big knock against Josh Allen. I still wouldn't say he's, Tom Brady or anything, but he's gotten a lot more accurate. It helps also to have wide receivers who can get as open as Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis and everybody can. So and Isaiah McKenzie as well. So they've got good weapons all over the field. So it's gonna be a test, and that's just the offense. And even if it's Case Keenum, Case Keenum, obviously you're downgrading a lot in the arm strength category, but otherwise they're both similar, quarterbacks who like to make plays, who have, they're able to make plays and respond to pressure by producing big time throws down the field. So Case Keenum, obviously Vikings fans very familiar with him. He struggles with accuracy. He doesn't have an NFL caliber, starting caliber arm, at least I would say. But we've seen him create crazy plays, especially when he has an amazing supporting cast around him. That's certainly what Buffalo has. with arguably some of the best wide receivers in football and a very good offensive line as well. Or at least the tackles are very good. I think the interior offensive line, especially a little bit of the injuries they've been dealing with, maybe a little bit more questionable. On the defensive side of the ball, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, this is the team that Brandon Beane has built the defense sort of from the ground up, and it's a very, very smart defense. I think they're missing some of their players.
So Tremaine Edmonds and Jordan Poyer were both DMPs in practice. Jordan Poyer hasn't played for a little while. They do have a backup their two safeties are Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. They've probably been the best safety duo in the NFL over the past few years, but their backup safety, and I can't remember his name right now, has been playing pretty well in Jordan Poyer's absence. On the defensive side of the ball, obviously the Bills have a ton of talent. They have added a ton of first and second round picks to the defensive line, and then they went out and gave Von Miller a huge contract. Von Miller, despite being in his mid-30s, is playing still at a dominant level on the defensive line. Like, he's terrorizing every offensive tackle he goes up against. It'll be a really good matchup to see him against our offensive tackles, and kind of a litmus test for a Christian Darrisaw if he's going up against him one-on-one. Tremaine Edmonds at the second level linebacker. They also have Matt Milano back there. Like, it's just incredibly talented. I don't believe Tre'Davious White is back yet from his injury. He tore his ACL towards the end of last year, but Dane Jackson and other corners on that team are playing at a high level in Leslie Frazier's defense. Former, obviously, Minnesota Vikings head coach Leslie Frazier, and the Bills have just done a fantastic job over the past few years trying to cobble together that cornerback room outside of Tre'Davious White. So it's not really a surprise to me that those corners are succeeding, even if one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL, right, a top 10 NFL corner when he's healthy, isn't on the field for them. They've been a top 5 defense by pretty much most metrics in the NFL, so it's going to be difficult to go up against, even if the Bills have a backup quarterback. Obviously, and as you mentioned, we've seen Case Keenum have that success throwing to Stephon Diggs in the past, right? It's not like he's never thrown footballs to Stephon Diggs before, so he even has some built-in chemistry, even if he's not getting any reps in practice with that guy. The Bills' offensive line, I would say, has been a little bit weaker than it has been in years past. Their running game has never been great with Josh Allen. They just haven't seemed to be able to put it together with the running backs and coordinating that running game. I will say it's probably been at its best this year compared to previous years, just because they're using a fullback a little bit more. They've probably gotten a little bit more creative in the running game, and Devin Singletary is a solid back who's going to be able to get yards out of contact and maximize plays, even if he's not going to break massive runs because he doesn't have top end speed. So there's a lot to be concerned about overall on the Bills. Obviously, adding a backup quarterback in gives the Vikings a significant advantage, but it's a backup quarterback who we know is a high variance player who could produce very well for this team. And is he's a scrappy player, right? I think that's who Case Keenum is as a player. We don't really need, like, we've seen him for an entire season, if you're a Vikings fan. So we kind of have a good understanding of who he is, and understand that if he's hot for the game, he can win you a football game. So it is something that the Vikings should still be concerned about with this Bills team, even if they do end up having to start the backup. Obviously, with a healthy Josh Allen, it's an entirely different story, and the Bills should be favored by 10 points, I think, against the Minnesota Vikings. They're just that dominant of a team, that dominant of an offense when Josh Allen is healthy, and they are rolling. But as it stands, I think if Case Keenum starts, it's a game the Vikings have a chance of stealing, but it's not necessarily, I think, that they should be expected to steal the game.
Yeah, and it's such a tough, it's a tough offense to defend because of what Josh Allen brings both as an athlete and as a runner, but also, the ability for these wide receivers to separate. I mean, Stephon Diggs, I think, best route runner in the NFL. Maybe if you prefer the vertical things that Tyreek Hill brings, or, Devontae Adams is up there too. And there are some younger guys who are creeping up there too, Justin Jefferson, top among them. But we know how good Stephon Diggs is. Gabe Davis is really good at separating too. And when you have sometimes the answer to guys who can separate that cleanly is, okay, just don't play them one-on-one and man, because they're going to beat you every time. But if you play zone, then the guys with huge arm strength are going to be fine, I'll just find the holes in the zone, throw it there, and we'll shred you all game long. So it's just a very tough defense to sort of slow down. You kind of just have to pray and hold on. So if Josh Allen isn't there, that helps a lot because the holes in defense get a lot more forgiving going from Josh Allen to Case Keenum. But on the defensive side of the ball, they have been a little bit weaker against the run. I think they're 27th in rush DVOA. By EPA per play, they're still kind of like they're not that bad. And I think the guys that they have, it's not that they are bad against the run. It's just that, I think Sean McDermott has kind of, even going back to his Carolina days, has kind of prioritized stopping the pass over stopping the run. And it's interesting because it's not a Vic Fangio defense, but it is another defense that, is more middle of the field open and much more zone. And that's kind of like Leslie Frazier calling the defense, wants to, play sort of shell defense over the top and not limit the explosives and force you to sort of have to dink and dunk and sustain drives. And that, I think, is a good match for what Kirk Cousins wants to do, because Kirk Cousins wants to beat you with explosives in middle of the field closed and attack you that way. And, Kirk Cousins is really good with the wide zone, the boots, the floods that sort of prey on those kinds of defenses. When you see him against middle of the field open, I think it's a little bit different. I think having Hockenson, this could be a big Hockenson game because that's kind of a nice way to attack those defenses. I mean, those dig routes, those are the open in the middle of the field open, and he's the guy you want to attack there with those routes. So there are ways to attack it, but I think just because they look bad on a chart against the run doesn't mean necessarily that the Vikings will do what the Packers just did to the Bills. You might look at that Packers game and think like, oh, well, we should just be feeding Dalvin all game. But like the thing is, if the Bills want to stop the run, they could just stop playing, two high defenses and shut it down. It's just a very talented defense, even though it's banged up. So it'll be, even if it's Case Keenum and Case Keenum is struggling to put up points, I think the Vikings are also going to be struggling to put up points. And similar in some ways to this Commanders game where Taylor Heineke, kind of a similar player to Case Keenum if that's the case. But I expect Cousins to be under a lot of pressure. I think Von Miller will be an excellent test for Christian Darrisaw because we've seen how much power he has. But if I have a complaint about Darrisaw, it's that sometimes he undersets and he can give up the edge. And, he's so strong that he'll often push guys past the arc anyway. But with Von Miller, who's both very good at timing the snap and it's just all worldly explosive off the snap. If Darrisaw isn't quick enough to get there, and like that's going to be a lot of very quick pressures from Von Miller against Darrisaw. So it's a tough matchup. It's a great test, even without Josh Allen. So it'll be really interesting to see how this team responds to finally having a team that won't, is just one of the most talented teams in football with or without their starting quarterback. So will be a good test. Should be a good matchup.
Yeah, and one thing with the run game is, you don't really care about defending the run all that much when you're up by 20 points. So that's something the Bills have kind of probably allowed to sag a little bit. Like the Packers, a lot of their success came after they were down big in that football game. So, it's something where, again, like you said, if the Bills are trying to stop the run, they're probably going to be more effective against the run than the numbers have shown that they are so far this season. But on the flip side, they've been really, really effective against the pass so far this year. So obviously that's something that we should be concerned about. So I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for our show today. Nick, do you have any final thoughts?
You got a score prediction for us?
It's so difficult because it's so dependent on whether or not Case Keenum is the starting quarterback, right? I think if Josh Allen were starting, I'd say the Bills are able to put up at least 30 points and limit the Vikings on the defensive side of the ball. 30-20, honestly, if Josh Allen is relatively full strength. If he's not, I think you can get maybe a somewhat lower scoring game, right? The Bills aren't going to be as effective on offense. In that case, the Vikings defense seems to be gelling. It might be a 2017 coin flip. I'd pick the Vikings if Case Keenum's starting.
Yeah, I'm with you too. I think if Josh Allen's playing and is healthy, I can see crazier things have happened, but Bills should be heavy favorites. And if it's Case Keenum, and I think looking at what the sharps know in the betting markets, I think it will be Case Keenum. If it is Case Keenum, I think it's closer to 50-50, and I'll give the tie to the Vikings because they've won every single 50-50 game so far. I think it'll be low scoring, maybe something like 17-13 or something. Vikings win off, just their sustained red zone continued success, turning those drives into enemy territory into touchdowns as opposed to field goals. So I do feel a lot more confident if it is Keenum for all the reasons we talked about. So, but that's all I have for you.
Yeah, no. So that'll do it for us. I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He's Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Gregg isn't here. He says he thinks the Vikings are going to win, just so all you guys know. He is at You've Been Gregged. We are at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. We're available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and we're also on YouTube. Obviously, you can just search for Kindred Skulls on YouTube to find us there. And with that, Skull Vikings.
Go. Go, baby.
Another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score.